Welcome to Gospel Truth with Andrew Womack, a teaching ministry that focuses on God's unconditional love and grace. And now, Andrew continues teaching from the life-changing Word of God about excellence.
Welcome to our Friday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today's the end of my second week teaching on a new book that I've got entitled Excellence. The subtitle is How to Pursue an Excellent Spirit. And I tell you, this has just been powerful. I'm sharing some things that could make a huge difference in your life. I hadn't got time to go back over all of this. Let me just say that I've established from the book of Daniel that Daniel, in Daniel chapter 6, verse 3, was promoted over everybody else because he had an excellent spirit. There are reasons why some people excel and others don't. And it's not all of these external things out there. It's the attitude that's on the inside. You got to change on the inside before you see things change on the outside. And then I began to teach from the book of Daniel, chapter 1, about Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, whom we know as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three Hebrew children refused to lose their identity with the Lord. Every one of their names had something in it about God that referred to God, and they refused to lose that. They refused to eat the king's meat. They refused to break the Jewish dietary laws. They held on to their identity, their worth, their value was related to their relationship with God, not these other things. So that's the very first thing. You got to have a conviction that every good thing in you is from God. Paul said it this way. He says, I count everything else but loss so that I might know Christ and the power of His resurrection. He counted everything else but dung. You've got to find your identity, your worth in the Lord. Then that leads to humility because you recognize that every good thing that's in you comes from God, and humility is a natural outflow of that. And then that leads to obedience. If you truly are humble and you aren't running your life, but instead you've submitted it to the Lord and you are putting Him first, well then obedience is just an automatic byproduct of that. So these are three things that we've discussed. Identity, security, worth, value found in God alone, and then humility to where you exalt Him and His will and not your will, and that just leads to obedience. And so yesterday we ended talking about how that the three Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to worship this idol of King Nebuchadnezzar, and he gave them a second chance, and he says, if you hear the music play and if you fall down and worship this idol, okay, but if not, I'll throw you into a fiery furnace. And they said, I read part of this yesterday, but let me just start here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Man, that is so powerful, so bold. They didn't care about themselves. They had their identity, their worth attached to God, not to what people had to say about them. They were humble. They were not promoting themselves. They were going to stand for God even if it was to their detriment, and that just automatically led to them obeying God. And they didn't care what the king did to them. Even if God didn't deliver them, they were going to serve God first. Every one of us ought to desire to be this way, but you can't get there if you haven't, first of all, completely committed yourself to your worth, your value, your identity being in God, in relationship with Him, and humbling yourself and exalting God above yourself. If you haven't done those things, I guarantee you, you will crumble when it comes to suffering. Self is going to suffer something if you stand for the Lord. And sad to say, there's way too many people that this is where they are. They will compromise. They'll back down. They won't stand up for the Lord. There's a lot of people say, well, I would do this, but yet you won't stand up for God when your family comes together and they begin to say all this ungodly stuff. Now, there's a right and a wrong way to do it. I'm not talking about being obnoxious and going in and just attacking everybody. We need to love people and we need to show grace to people, but there is a place to stand up for what's right. And there are people watching this program that you won't stand up in your family, you won't stand up at work, you won't stand up in a situation where for some reason people might criticize you and call you some kind of a bigot or make fun of you because you believe the Bible, and you won't stand up there, but then you're going to stand when your life is on the line. Doesn't work that way. If you aren't faithful in a little thing, you won't be faithful in big things. If you want to be faithful like this, you got to learn to be faithful in the small things. These 3 Hebrew children had refused to eat the king's meat back in the first chapter. They stood on their principles and refused to compromise. And because they had done that, and I'm sure that there was other times that they did it, that's the reason they were emboldened to do it here. Let me just unplug for a second. I'll come right back to this. But David is another example. This same thing works in everybody's life. You don't just jump from where you are into total faithfulness. It's a process. And you just start being faithful in a little thing. And if you're faithful in a little thing, God will commit more to you. But David did this same thing when he went out to fight Goliath. Saul, the king, said, you can't do this. He's a man of war from his youth, and you're but a youth. He's a giant, and you're a runt. You can't do this. And you know how David convinced him to let him go fight Goliath? He referred back to when he was keeping his father's sheep on the backside of the desert. This is in 1 Samuel chapter 17. And he said when he was keeping the sheep, there came a lion and a bear out, and they took a sheep, and he went out and with his bare hands, he slew the lion and the bear. And did you know, even though his father had him there to watch the sheep and they wanted him to try and scare off the animals, I don't believe that Jesse, David's father, wanted him to take on a lion and a bear with his bare hands and put his own life at risk. He went far above what was demanded. He had a spirit of excellence, just like what we're teaching about. And he said, the reason I know that I can overcome this giant is because I was faithful in a little thing. I slew the lion and the bear on the backside of the desert when nobody was watching. And now I'll be able to kill the giant when everybody's watching. See, there's a lot of people that want to wait until they're the pastor of a 1,000-member church, and then they're going to serve God, and then they're going to study, and then they're going to pray. But you won't be faithful right now where you are. If you're just teaching a little Sunday school class or teaching a Bible study, you won't give yourself totally to it. But if you had 10,000 members, then you'd be faithful. That's the opposite of what Jesus said. You got to be faithful in a little, and then you increase to where you're faithful over much. These men had already been true to their convictions, and that's the reason that they were able to stand here. So here's the king's reaction. In verse 19, Daniel 3:19, then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage, the word visage means face, was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Personally, I believe that this means that it was actually demonic. He was so enraged that somebody would honor a god above him. He thought he was God. He made this image of gold and proclaimed himself as God and wanted everybody to worship him. And these 3 Hebrew children were not conforming to this. And I mean, literally, you could see the demons come up. His whole facial features, everything changed. He became demon-possessed. It says, the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 17 times more than it was wont to be heated. This is totally irrational. If you're going to throw somebody into a fire, does it have to be 7 times hotter than just normal fire to kill a person? I mean, fire is going to kill the person. This was irrational, but this is what happens when you give yourself over to the demons, over to rage and wrath. Wrath is not smart. It says over in James chapter 1 that the wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. You ought to just make a commitment that when you are angry, you just don't make decisions. You don't do things because you are not going to be rational when you're having a fit, when you're angry. This was irrational. He didn't have to heat it 7 times harder. And by doing so, he took his 3 strongest men in his entire army and he sacrificed them. They burned to death trying to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace. And so it was irrational. It cost him dearly. His 3 mightiest men died because of his irrational behavior. But this is the way it is when you have a temper. When you're angry, man, that's not God at all. It says in verse 21, then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, their hats, their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Now this is interesting. The 3 men who threw them in, they died, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't die. So already, before they even got into the furnace, just the heat that was coming from it had already killed other people, but they were protected from that. And in verse 24, it says, then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? And they answered and said unto the king, true, O king. He answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. So the fire consumed the people who threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fire. They died before they even got there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown in, and all it did to them, it didn't burn them. Later on, it says that the smell of smoke wasn't even on them. They not only didn't get burned, they didn't get singed, they didn't even have the smell of smoke. All the fire did was loose their bonds. The ropes that they had tied them with, they burned, but it didn't burn them, it set them free. And Nebuchadnezzar looked down and he saw 4 men. There was only 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown in, but there was a 4th person, and he said the likeness of the 4th is like the Son of God. Now, I don't know how you know what the Son of God looks like, but apparently it was exceptional. There was something about the 4th person that made Nebuchadnezzar think that this was the Son of God. And I don't know for sure, and I've read other people's commentaries. I could give you an opinion, but I'm just going to say I don't know. I suspect that this literally was Jesus, a pre-incarnate manifestation of Jesus that was there in the fire honoring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because of their uncompromising faithfulness. Man, that's pretty awesome. I mean, it would be awesome to live through being thrown into a furnace and not even have the smell of smoke on you. You aren't burned, you aren't singed. That's miraculous. But then to have the Son of God there talking to you and walking around with you, man, this beats anything. I mean, this is equivalent to Moses being on the mountain and spending 40 days and 40 nights in the presence of God and having his face radiate light. I mean, this is major, major deal. And you know why it happened? Because they were completely committed to God. Their life was dedicated to Him. That was their life, their source, their value. They weren't promoting themselves. They humbled themselves and put God first. They refused to compromise. They obeyed God. Because they did those 3 things, they not only survived the fire, but they experienced a pre-incarnate manifestation of Jesus. Man, this is powerful. Most people would love to have something like this happen. You would love to be able to brag about it, but will you do what they did? Will you stand and not let people conform you to this world? Will you stand on who you are in Christ and what He's done? Will you humble yourself and promote God and His gospel ahead of yourself? Will you obey God even if it could cost you your life? I guarantee you get committed to God like that and you walk like that, and you will experience the supernatural deliverance and presence and power of God. You may not experience the exact same thing that these 3 men did, but I guarantee you it'll be the same thing. God will honor you. I've already used this verse out of 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 30, and the Lord told Eli, He says, those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me will be lightly esteemed. When you honor God, God will honor you. Over in James chapter 4, 1 Peter chapter 5, it says, humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, and He will exalt you in due time. I promise you, if you humble yourself, if you put God first, if you obey Him, even when it looks like it's to your detriment, it's going to work out to your advantage. You will be promoted. You will be lifted up, and that's the promise of God. Everybody wants this results. Everybody would like to prosper. Everybody would love to have some experience where 3,000 or 4,000 years later, people are still reading your story and talking about it. But very few people will do what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did to get to this place. Man, this is powerful. You've got to find your life in God. You got to humble yourself, promote Him above yourself. You got to obey what He tells you to do. And if you do that, you will experience God the way that these 3 Hebrew children did. So in verse 26, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth out of the midst of the fire, and the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Man, this is awesome. You know, some people don't believe that this really happened. They believe that this is somehow or another an allegory. I believe this happened just exactly the way it said. And I know some, well, how could this be? Because all you're doing is thinking in the natural. You don't think supernatural. You don't believe that God can do anything that is outside of the normal, natural realm. Well, I pity you because, man, the Bible is full of miracles, and I've experienced it. You're just too late to tell me that God doesn't do things like this. I've mentioned this before, but I've seen my son raised from the dead after being dead for 5 hours in a morgue, on a slab, stripped naked with a toe tag on, came back to life with no brain damage. I've seen my wife raised from the dead. Just this last week, I saw blind eyes open. In the last 3 days, I've seen blind eyes open, deaf ears open instantly, and the lame walk. In just the last week, I've seen all of that happen. And some of you think, I don't believe that. Well, then it won't work for you. But I'm telling you, these things are happening today. They happen today. I believe that this happened just exactly the way it says. And then in verse 28 it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent His angel and delivered His servants that trusted in Him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. You know, this is amazing to me that just moments before this same man, Nebuchadnezzar, had made an idol and wanted everybody to worship the idol, and he commanded them to be killed if they didn't do it. But after seeing the miraculous display of God, he was totally humbled. There's a difference between being humbled, or let me say it this way, there's a difference between being humble and being humiliated. I think it's probably more accurate to say he had been humiliated. He had promoted himself and says, whose God is able to overcome me? He proclaimed himself greater than God. Now he had been humiliated. That didn't mean he was humble, but he had been humiliated. And now he was proclaiming that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God was greater than him. And he says in verse 29, Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Did you know that promotion, the way up in God's kingdom, is down? Most people would think that if you want to be promoted in a pagan culture, in an ungodly kingdom where the king is proclaiming that everybody has to bow down to this image, then you better just go with the flow. You better get with the program. You better conform. But instead, they didn't conform. They stood on their convictions. They humbled themselves, put God ahead of themselves. They obeyed even if it meant their death. And that's how they were promoted. They were promoted over all of the province of Babylon. Not because they compromised, but because they failed to compromise. Man, that's awesome. You know, I've got some things in my life that are just convictions with me. They aren't necessarily for everybody else. Though, you know, back in the very beginning of our ministry, Jamie and I were starving, and we went to a meeting where a man was teaching on prosperity, and we needed this. Jamie was 8 months pregnant, and we had been 2 weeks without anything but water because we had no food. We needed prosperity. I needed his teaching, and I remember looking at his tape, and there were all of these titles that I knew could have helped me, and I couldn't get them because I didn't have any money. And I looked at Jamie, and she had tears in her eyes. I mean, we were fighting for the life of our child. And I made a decision right then that if the Lord ever showed me something from His Word that would help other people, I'd never deny them access to it because of a lack of finances. And I have put out hundreds of millions of CDs, books, tapes, through the internet. We have over 1 million downloads a month, and 99% of it's all free. And we have done all of this, and we have done this free. Now, that's a conviction for me. I'm not against anybody else who sells their materials. They can do whatever God tells them to do. But here's the reason I brought that up, is to say that that is my conviction. And yet I have had people come to me by the hundreds and tell me to quit doing this. I've had people who managed my ministry, and every time we got into a financial bind, you got to quit giving things away. You got to start putting a price on it. And I have been pressured and bullied and condemned. I've had people come and prophesy, people that I respect, prophesy and say, "Thus saith the Lord, you've got to start selling your stuff now." And you know what? I have just refused to compromise on this. It's a conviction that I have. And because of it, God has promoted me. Matter of fact, many of the people who in the past have ridiculed me and said things to me, now I have passed them up as far as the influence and the reach of the ministry, the number of materials that we send out, and things like this. And I've had people who in the past criticized me now come around and they are trying to emulate what I'm doing. And you know how it happened? I didn't compromise. I obeyed what God has told me to do, and I'm telling you, the way up in God's kingdom is down. You don't promote yourself. You don't compromise trying to gain an edge. You just follow God, do what God tells you to do. And if you keep doing it over a prolonged period of time, then promotion will come from God. God will promote you because of an excellent spirit. Man, that's powerful. This is what this whole book is about. This is a study in the book of Daniel, and it's talking about Daniel and his 3 friends. And I promise you, this is going to help you. It'll be a blessing to you. So check it out. This book is entitled Excellence. The subtitle is How to Pursue an Excellent Spirit. And I promise you, this will help you. It's a brand new teaching. We've got it not only in book form, but I've got CDs and DVDs. And I encourage you to please get this. Next week will be the end of my teaching on this, and you need this. It'd also be great for you to share this with somebody else. So listen to our announcer as he gives you all of this information. Please call or write and request the materials today, and then join me again next week as we continue this teaching on excellence.
Discover the blessings that accompany an excellent spirit when you get Andrew's teaching titled Excellence.
I'd like to encourage you to get my newest book, Excellence. The subtitle is How to Pursue an Excellent Spirit. And what this is basically a study of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the book of Daniel. And I tell you, this is powerful. Everybody would like the promotion that they experienced, but they don't want to do what they did in order to get there. But Daniel chapter 6 verse 3 says that Daniel was promoted because he had an excellent spirit. This will help you to accomplish the same thing.
Make sure to get your copy of Andrew's brand new book titled Excellence when you contact us today. This series is also available in a CD album or in a DVD album made from our daily television broadcast. Excellence is also available for audio download absolutely free from our website. The third audio teaching in today's series is available for a gift of any amount when you write or call. We encourage everyone to give, but if you're simply unable to afford it, Andrew and his partners will provide this third CD free of charge. You can order resources or become a Grace Partner today through our website at awmi.net. While there, you can discover more product details and download many free resources. Or call our helpline Monday through Friday from 4:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Our helpline number is 719-635-1111. To write us, use the address on your screen. We appreciate your generosity and hope to hear from you today.
On this episode of The Inside Story, Andrew interviews Ashley and Carly Terradays.
So it was 11 years ago, March 2006, and our daughter was very sick. I won't go into the whole story, but they basically gave her a couple of weeks. They didn't think she was going to make it.
But I remember we were driving home from my parents' house. We were driving Hannah to the hospital to have surgery, and I remember the point on the road, we were at a stoplight, the first time we heard that it's God's will for us to be healed every time. And I just looked at Ash and I'm like, it was like one of those Selah moments where you're just like, hang a second, stop the car, rewind. Did he really just say that? Could that really be true?
To hear the rest of the Terradays story, go to awmi.net and click on The Inside Story.
I'd like to encourage you to pray about whether or not God wants you to participate in our Charis Bible College. You know, Bible College is powerful. We are seeing people's lives change, and I know that some of you are thinking, well, I can't come to Colorado. Well, we have extension schools literally scattered all over the world. And somebody says, but there isn't one in my area. Well, we've got correspondence, but we also have an online course where you actually become a part of a class. You can work at your own pace, but you do have to complete the materials in a certain given time. We've got a lot of ways for you to take advantage of it, so please pray about it and then join us at Charis Bible College.
The Ministry Training Program is designed to help Charis Bible graduates identify and be equipped in their calling in one of our 7 distinctive schools and our leadership program. The Charis Bible College Business School exists to instill sound business principles in the body of Christ and populate the body and the marketplace with effective, well-financed ministry. For more information, visit charisbiblecollege.org.
We all know there's only one Gospel Truth TV show with Andrew Womack, but here's the best part. There's many ways to watch it. You can always check your local TV listings for Gospel Truth, but if you want to watch it right now or on the go to awmi.net and click on this week's TV near the top of the screen. From there, you can watch thousands of episodes on your smartphone, tablet, or laptop. You can even watch Andrew on his very own Roku channel. Roku streaming devices are available online and at many fine retailers. The good news is you never have to miss another episode of Gospel Truth with Andrew Womack. Why not try it now? Go to awmi.net and click on this week's TV. It's that easy.